they're in Canada or the U.S. They're all de facto, and that's the power of my documents because I point out, I tell them they have no authority, and once you tell them they have no authority, then that takes away their presumptions and they can't proceed. And it's called estoppel. It puts them in a position of estoppel, and so it makes it very difficult for them to proceed. Matter of fact, it's if they did proceed, you could have them in jail.
Okay.
So, yes.
The caller's on. Ravana is here.
Okay, Ravana, are you there?
Yes. Hello, hello. How are you doing tonight?
I'm not doing too bad.
I was wanting to ask. I have a problem that I'm dealing with, and I'm trying to get. I need that letter from that senator. That would be very useful. And I'm trying to find a copy of the Constitution with the 13th Amendment. And my question would be, the 11th Amendment and the difference between District Court of the United States and United States District Courts.
Yeah, I've heard people arguing that. I am not sure about that difference. That's entirely possible. I have heard people that have talked about that. I haven't. I remember seeing a court case actually that I think talked about that, but I don't have that available. So I am not absolutely sure about the validity or how that works or what it exactly means. But
yeah,
I can tell you that.
Sorry, the two different district courts is something that I just stumbled across also. So I just figured I'd ask.
Yeah, I can tell you that they're all admiralty courts, and it's all color of law, and because everything's under martial law, they can do literally anything they want. You know, I mean, I usually go in there. If I go in there, I just get belligerent and start dumping on them, and to the point that they want to get rid of me as quick as possible. Are you still there?
Yes, absolutely. What I was thinking is if I'm looking at, I have a warrant issued right now, and the situation is that I was not able to go there because the cops had impounded my vehicle for 30 days, and my court date was in that 30 days. I called the court. I told them, I said, look, I'm a living human being. I'm not a corporation. You have me on the ticket as a corporation, blah, 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 and a little bit of that, and said, I cannot fulfill my side of the contract, which is to appear in court. Therefore, I am sending it back. No contract. I mailed it back to them. Said to be opened by trustee of court only. And they still issued the warrant. So I'm looking at right now how to go about quashing that. What also, this is kind of on the same topic, constitutional constables. It's my understanding there must be 2 constables per county under the Constitution.
You know, I'm not sure about that. It depends on which state you're in, I think. What state are you in?
I'm in California right now. And oddly enough, I had just spoken to the county administrator, and she admitted that the sheriff's department is paid by the corporation of the county administration, and that the sheriff of the county is the acting constable. So he's wearing 2 hats, which in my mind is a conflict of interest. Because he's trying to hold a constitutional office, but he's also being paid for being a sheriff.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. But you can basically when you bring out his oath of office, and that's why I serve him with my document, is I bring out his oath of office, and so then the only issue then is his oath of office. But otherwise, you're right. There would be a conflict of interest, and that's why they can do the stuff they do and get away with it. But if you, that's why I use registered mail. I serve them with a document telling them I accept your oath of office, and I use registered mail, which is proof of service, and that makes it very difficult for them to proceed. But as far as
this is the question that might help people also is, do you, when you send in documents, are they written on one side, and is there anything on the back, or are they printed on both sides? Because I've heard several different ways of how to do that.
In commerce, they're printed on both sides. At common law, there's only one side to the piece of paper.
Okay, now what I've heard is that you print whatever you want them to read on the one side, and then you flip it over, and you put to read the same as other, and then put a stamp on it and sign across the stamp.
Yeah, that's all commerce. You're talking commercial.
Okay.
You're getting commercial stuff mixed up with
Okay,
common
that's
law.
commerce then. Okay, I just was wondering. Thank you.
Yeah, that's all commercial. There's a lot of people that get commercial stuff mixed up with common law. Common law, it's only on one side. And in fact, the court rules, a lot of times that talks about it there, where it's only supposed to be on one side.
Okay. Yeah, because, well, the thing is if the courts are administrative, then it's commercial, is it not?
Oh yeah, they're all commercial. There's no doubt about that. But they still recognize common law, and they still wear a number of different hats.
So if I was trying to do common law and I did the thing with the stamp and the signature, that would put me in their jurisdiction of the commercial side of it. So, right?
Yeah, I would stay away from that. If you want to have to access common law, then I would definitely not do any of that stuff, because that's talking out of both sides of your face.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that definitely helps, because, like I said, I'm trying to figure out exactly how to go about doing this without venturing into the commercial side of it. But if I end up getting dragged into court and they start throwing this at me, I'm going to bring up the fact that, are you charging me as a corporation? Is this the matter of the trust bond account? If it's a matter of the trust, I want a comprehensive accounting of all the funds and everything that's been going on for the last 20 years. You know?
Yeah, I try and stay away from that kind of stuff, quite frankly, because they're all thieves. And there's no such thing as a sovereign in commerce. And once you go into commerce, you give up your sovereignty, and so then what happens is if they don't follow their rules right, your only remedy is commercial, so then you have to go in front of other thieves to get a remedy from a thief that stole your money, and that's almost impossible. Right.
It's a big roundabout.
Right.
And the thing is for me is if they're trying to pull me in as a corporation, though, how do I? This might be a little repetitive for you to answer, but how do I explain to them that I'm not that corporation? How do I stand there and like, okay, in my case, I have a warrant. If I do get arrested, I end up showing up in court. They bring me before the judge. What do I say in that instance?
Well, first of all, I don't go into their court, and so I wouldn't unless I'm dragging them in. So I really couldn't tell you what to say or not to say. But usually, what I do is I try and handle it administratively, where I serve them with my document, and my document is a notice, and I give them instructions, and I'm the king, and I'm telling them what to do. And so that's worked pretty well for me.
Right. Yeah, I understand what you're saying there, for sure. One interesting thing I was thinking about is, okay, if the cops are operating under martial law and Title 50 of the War Powers Act, I think any interaction with them is interaction with an enemy combatant or an enemy alien from their side. From our side, that's a two-way street, though. If they're saying that it's an enemy combatant, then the rules of combat apply and the rules of engagement. So, they're always trying to do this one-way street thing, in my mind. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I agree. I mean, once you go into commerce, I mean, you're done. and that's why I don't go in there. I mean, the key is to stay out of commerce, in my opinion. And if you can do that, I'm assuming this is state court, and so state court clearly, even though they're color of law, they're much more quick to recognize common law, and again, but you have to defeat their presumptions, and there's already been some presumptions that are put in place because they give you the ticket, and but what I'd be doing is I'd be serving them with my documents by registered mail, and you have to understand that the warrant is not against you. So you know, the same thing happened with me in Arizona. They issued a warrant. You haven't watched my YouTube videos, I don't think, but they issued a warrant against my straw man, and they couldn't find me, and so they came to my work, and I took a week's vacation. Because I knew that they came. And I filed a lawsuit, and then I served the chief judge with a notice demanding that she quash that warrant. And I said, quote, because we all know that the corporate commercial agents, the police in brackets, are too stupid to tell the difference between a sovereign living soul and a strawman vessel, unquote. And I said, furthermore, chief judge, I filed this lawsuit. You're named in it. Here's the case number. You're going to get served with it soon enough. If you fail to quash the warrant for the arrest of the straw man vessel, it will be further proof of your dereliction of duty to regulate your subordinates. And she quashed the warrant, and the reason I know she quashed the warrant is that the Attorney General responded for her in the lawsuit, and they told me that it was perfectly appropriate that I petition the Chief Judge to get the warrant quashed. So, you know, I guess what my point is that they're really not looking for you. They're looking for that straw man. And the key is don't give them, make up your own ID. If you ever get stopped, you got to start using the administrative procedure and setting it up for yourself, because if you ever get stopped, you don't want to give them that government-issued ID. And chances are you'll probably get away with it. I know that I got stopped, or I got in a car accident in Arizona about 3 or 4 years after this other incident happened, and the cop actually pulled me up in their computer, and even though I gave them my personal ID, but they pulled me up in their computer, and so this warrant was still out there, but they didn't arrest me, and I heard them talking over the radio, and the town, that is the town of Florence that issued this warrant, they said that we don't want to extradite. Well, I was in Pinal County, and town of Florence is the county seat for Pinal County, and it was a Pinal County sheriff I was dealing with, and here they're saying we don't want to extradite. I think that they were basically telling them that they didn't want to have to deal with me. But anyways, the bottom line is if you do it right, then you're going to set up that same kind of scenario.
Yeah, I've dealt with the cops in that area of Arizona. I lived out there on and off for 5 years. Yeah. I had one cop who I was a driver's license protester at that point, didn't have a driver's license at all. And he had pulled up, he didn't pull me over, but he pulled up and he was talking to me, and he said, "Didn't I see you parked somewhere?" And he said, "You know, you got ID and whatever." So I showed him my ID, and he says, "So how do you get around?" I said, "Well, I travel." And he says, "Do you still have your social security number?" And I said, "Well, unfortunately, I'm still trying to figure out the paperwork to get rid of it." He says, "All right, if I pull you over, I'm going to write you a ticket." So even that long ago, I knew that there was something tied in with the social security number and the corporation because, you know, I mean, they told me.
Right. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
so,
sorry, I had called the marshal's office, and I actually told them, I said, "Look, all right, you guys issued a warrant for the strawman vessel for my corporation. I'm a living human being. If you guys come to serve the warrant, I'm going to consider it aggravated kidnapping because you guys are too stupid to understand the difference between a living human being and the corporation." And the guy basically says, "I'm not going to put that down in the notice," and he hangs up on me.
Well, so serve that on them by registered mail, and it'll put them into estoppel.
Yeah, the problem is I'm waiting on my disability check to be able to even do any of the paperwork and mail anything. So that'll be the next couple of days here. So.
Yeah, well, that's what I would do is serve them because you're right, and so if you serve them with something by registered mail, it puts them into estoppel.
Well, going back to the 11th Amendment, I mean the judicial power of the judicial power shall not be construed to extend to matters of law and equity. They don't have jurisdiction. So, how do I go about establishing the proper jurisdiction? That would be another question. It would be the civil grand jury, possibly?
Really, the proper jurisdiction is a jury of your peers, and so you have to get state citizens and convene a grand jury of state citizens and bring down an indictment, present your case, bring down an indictment. I talk about that when I talk about lawful de jure government. So then what you do is you put them on trial, and you get another jury of your peers, and you put them on trial for crimes that the grand jury hands down, and then if you convict them, then you send that conviction to Dun & Bradstreet and Standard & Poor's, and they won't be able to get insurance. I mean, you can hurt them in a major way until they, deal with that conviction.
Yeah, I'm going to be serving papers on the cop who impounded my vehicle for theft of private property, but I'm not sure how that's going to work because it's registered through the state, which means that the state is actually holding the title, so I'd be third party or something, but I'm the one who actually bought it. But I don't know, it'll make them think twice about doing it again.
Yeah, that gets complicated, and once they steal it, it's really hard to get it back.
Well, I've got it back, so I'm not so much worried about that part, but the fact that, they took it for a month. I've been having to walk 2 miles back and forth to town, and I was supposed to drive 3.5 hours to go to court while I didn't have a vehicle. So pain and suffering,
Well, I mean, you could certainly file a lawsuit against them and bring up all this stuff. Certainly, I don't know if you're on one of my groups, but you could certainly get access to some pretty good court cases that you could use.
Right on. Yeah. Well, what is your opinion on the 11th Amendment? How would that apply to what? Just pick a case and go through it. Explain it to people.
Well, they don't have any authority, obviously. I mean, the 11th Amendment is only one reason. There's a whole bunch of reasons. But the key is because it's all under martial law, you have to point that out to them before they attack you, because otherwise the Supreme Court gives them qualified immunity. And if they have qualified immunity, then that gives them a one-time get-out-of-jail-free card.
Oh, did you just see the case that was decided? I think it was for California, that any employee of I take it back. Any lawyer who works for the state in any capacity now has immunity. I just saw that on Fine Law.
Their immunity is qualified immunity, and once you defeat their presumptions, they don't have it anymore.
Okay. All right.
But you got to defeat their presumptions, and you got to do it before they attack you. Otherwise, they have qualified immunity.
So generally, how long do you have to reply to something like that? I've heard like 40 days, 30 days.
Reply to what?
Say if they send me the notice for the tickets and the mandatory appearance, and the court date was just about a month ago, a little less than a month ago. So from my understanding, I have 40 days to now respond to their issuing of the warrant, I think.
Yeah, usually it's at least 30 days. It depends on which state you're in, but usually it's at least 30 days up to 60 days before they gotta season that warrant. And so they gotta let it season itself for 30 days to 60 days.
Well, right, because it's securitized, and then it's only worth money after they let it sit for a while.
Yeah, something like that. I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, that's something that I'm kind of speculating on, but that would make sense because we know that anything that got a signature on it like that, it's all administrative and they're all securities. You know, I mean, all the tickets and everything. So that would just make sense to me anyway.
Right. There's a guy that's on Skype that's saying that if they drag you in there, as soon as they call your name, say, I object. And when asked what your objection is, you say civil or criminal. And then if they say civil, say document and verify my obligation. And they cannot. In the end, it'll be the end of case. This other guy says that if they say criminal to the judge only, do you have a complaint against me? Obviously, they do not. End of the case. That's this guy Spud on Skype is saying.
Yeah, that's going on the subject matter jurisdiction theory, which is good. I mean, you can't really argue with it. I've not actually tried it yet, but
with my procedure, the key is to do everything to take away their presumptions, because then you set them up for a lawsuit and they know it, and for criminal liability. And what it'll do is it'll make it so they don't even want to talk to you anymore.
Right. That's what I would prefer. Exactly. I just don't want to deal with them. I'm going to be sending off a document to the sheriff's department stating that since my contract to operate a vehicle as an agent of the state has now been revoked, I no longer have a contract with you. Therefore, any time that you stop me to speak to me, I will consider it being under duress. And I'm going to say, you know, for any hour that I'm stopped, it's $100,000, blah, blah, blah. That's my what my time is worth, and, you know, go from there. I mean, basically, that's what it comes down to, is you have to send them notice that you are competent to conduct your own affairs, that you are going to be following whatever laws that you decide to list, the Constitution, and then say, this is your notice. There you go.
Yeah, but if you're going to do that, you do it by registered mail, and it may help you in the future, but it may not help you in the past, because at the time in the past, they had qualified immunity.
Yeah, I understand that. Yep.
So, but you got to start somewhere. It's got to be started somewhere. And actually, if you do it well enough with your notices and stuff, then it puts them in a position that they just want to make the thing go away. And so that would be, you know, something you might, you know, want to consider at least.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the main thing with me is I simply don't want to have to deal with them showing up, knocking on my door for the warrant. I mean, that would be really annoying. I have chickens and cats I need to deal with.
Well, that's why I always have a private mailbox, so then they don't know where to find me.
I don't have an address right now, but I live in a broken camper that you can see from the road driving past, so they know where I'm at if they really want to find me.
Yeah, I don't own anything either.
Right. Well, they got really upset the last time when they came up and they were like, "So do you have you know, registration or license or anything for the it's a big RV?" And I'm like, "No. The owner died like about 8 years ago, and it's been through like 3 different owners. I got a bill of sale somewhere. You want me to go in and find it?" They weren't really happy.
Well, if you don't move it, they got nothing to say.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there is a tag on the back. It's from the owner who last had it registered. If they really want to go and look it up, they can find that the guy died, you know, and hey, it's mine now.
Yeah, see, what I do is I tell them, part of my notice is I tell them that it's not a motor vehicle, it's a private vehicle, and it'll have private vehicle in the rear bumper area, and leave me alone, basically. You don't have any more authority over me than a Walmart rent-a-cop.
Well, yeah, that's pretty much what they are. I mean, they work for the corporation. The corporation's the state. The state is basically a giant corrupt version of Walmart.
Right. That's all it is.
Yep. Well, hey, I'll let you get back to your show. It was awesome. I just had a couple of questions there. One last thing is, you had put out your email, and I was trying to send a request for some documents, and it kept saying that I could not get to you. So I don't know what's going on with that, but I will contact you later on Skype. The email you gave out wasn't working for me, but I'll get a hold of you through Skype later on, okay?
Yeah, engineerwin@gmail.com.
Okay. I tried like different ones, and none of them worked for me, so I'll try it again here.
Okay, I'll say it again, but it's just the word engineer, as in steam engineer or aerospace engineer, with three words, win, W-I-N, afterwards, all one word. So engineerwin@gmail.com.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay, so anyways, to keep things moving on here, here's another quote. This is Penhallows versus Doan's Administrators. This is an old U.S. court case, 3 U.S. 54, 1795. This is Supreme Court. Quote, "It is a rule at common law, the reason applies when equity and other civil law cases, that if a party can plead a fact material to his defense and omits to do it at the proper time, he can never avail himself of it afterwards," unquote. So, even at common law, if you have an issue like I'm the king and you don't tell them about it till after they've attacked you, it's too late. And that's at common law. Now, some other things that people can do is there's in Canada, there's a guy that I know that did this. He told me about it. A bill of exchange was done with a vehicle that the bank was trying to steal. Okay, so the guy was late on his payments, and so they did $5,000 worth of legal and equitable title in a vehicle worth approximately $15,000 was exchanged for labor to a third party. Okay, so this is a third party, a bill of exchange. In other words, they did a bill of exchange for $5,000 worth of legal and equitable title. It was exchanged for labor. The third party then took the bill of exchange to the bank and asked them for their interest in the vehicle. The third party was prepared to pay off whatever the banks claimed it was owed. And the third party went to the bank and showed them the bill of exchange and said, "I need to know what your interest is in this vehicle." And the bank said, "Can you come back in half an hour?" And so then in a half an hour, I said, "Sure." He went down the street, he had a copy, he came back, and when he got back, the bank signed the vehicle over to him. And the significance of that is that they did not claim anything. And there was supposed to have been about $10,000 worth of debt still owed on that vehicle, and what happened is the registration process was completely different for that vehicle, and so what happened is something real was exchanged for the vehicle, and like the man's labor, and so that took it out of the matrix essentially. The bank released the vehicle. This has not been done, to my knowledge, on real property. But with something like this, it'd probably be a good idea to get it notarized at a minimum. So then another question is that are we in our city or at our city? Okay. The key is you don't want to be in any corporations, and a lot of places have all these corporations, especially in Canada. They have these regional municipalities, and if you tell them you're in Toronto, well then you're in a corporation, and you're not in a place. You're at a place. That's proper English, and so you say I'm at Toronto. Am I in Fort Worth or at Fort Worth? I'm at Fort Worth. Fort Worth is a place. And then when I say I'm in Texas, I don't like to, on my paperwork, I'll say I'm on the land of Texas. And there's a difference than being in Texas, okay? Because, again, Texas is a corporation. Are you in New York City or the city of New York? Okay, you got to think about this stuff, because it's by your words that they get you. And New York City is the common law way of describing it, okay? New York City is a city. In other words, you have a proper name, New York, and then the city is the adjective that describes the proper name. The city comes after the proper name, New York City. But when the city of New York, the word city is an adjective that's before the proper name. Well, that's not proper English. And so what happens is that puts it into the matrix. It doesn't exist. And city of New York's a corporation. New York City is common law. And so you have to think about this stuff, and especially when you make an affidavit. I can't tell you how many times I'll see an affidavit that's notarized, and up at the front it'll have County of Westchester, City of New York. Well, that's a corporation. You're saying that you're notarizing this document in a corporation. And so you got to say Westchester County, New York State, or New York Republic, or just New York. You have to think about these kinds of things. It's by your own words that they get you. At law versus in-law. If you're in-law, it's because of a contract. Your mother-in-law is because of a marriage. That's a contract. So at law is common law. Is your house in a corporation? If you have Arabic numbers on your house, the number 1, the number 2, the number 3, then it's in the matrix. Even at the U.S. Supreme Court website, they don't use Arabic numerals. They spell out the numbers, and you even see that on land patents. First Street in Washington is spelled out F-I-R-S-T, Street, and that's on the U.S. Supreme Court's own rules. Anytime you get a letter from the government or any corporation, it's an offer of contract. You have to treat it that way. If the corporation sending you a letter that says, your grass is too long, and we want you to mow your grass, or you're going to have to pay a $200 fine, that's an offer of contract. You reject their offer of contract within 3 days. Also, another thing is that they can't send a letter unless it's to all block capital letters. And so, if you're even thinking that they're going to send something to you, administrate the local bureaucrat and head them off at the pass. And chances are they won't even try and send you something. But another thing you can do is you write on the outside, refuse for fraud. If you don't accept it, then there's nothing there. They don't have any authority again. They don't have a shred of authority. And so part of it is just don't accept the letter. If it's sent to a zip code, it's sent to a martial law jurisdiction. They cannot send anything unless it's to a zip code. Refuse for fraud. No such person at this address. The last thing I got from IRS about 4 or 5 years ago was refuse for fraud. No such person at this address. And I haven't heard a word from them since. There's a way that you can reject their offer of contract, but I'm not going to go into that here. But if you get an offer of contract from the corporation, what I'll do is I'll send them an invoice, and I'll never hear from them again. If I get an offer of contract from the government, I send a notice and demand with an invoice, and I see what happens. You do not want to go into their courts. Their courts have the appearance of justice. And here's a definition, color of law. Quote, the appearance or semblance without the substance of legal right. Misuse of power possessed by virtue of state law and made possible only because the wrongdoer is clothed with authority of state is action taken under color of law. Everything they do is color of law. So what happens when the judge rules against you and says you're a person? Do you have to do what he says? What's going on? Quote, the claim and exercise of a constitutional right cannot be converted into a crime, unquote. That's Miller versus U.S., 230 Fed Reports, 486. Here's another one. Quote, there can be no sanction or penalty imposed upon one because of his exercise of constitutional rights, unquote. That's Shearer versus Cullen, 481 Fed Reports, 946. Quote, no state shall convert a liberty into a privilege, license it, and charge a fee therefore, unquote. U.S. Supreme Court, Murdoch versus Pennsylvania, 319 U.S. 105. Quote, if a state converts a right into a privilege, the citizen can ignore the license and fee and engage in the right with impunity, end quote. That's U.S. Supreme Court again, Shuttlesworth versus City of Birmingham, Alabama, 373 U.S. 262. It's an offer of contract. That's the way you have to treat it. Reject their offer of contract and file a criminal complaint. I've done that with judges. I can't tell you how many judges I've filed criminal complaints against them. It really pisses them off, too. But wah. Do you know who you are? I mean, I'm still walking around, aren't I? And I ruined their career is what I did. And that's exactly what I wanted to do. Here's a quote. An officer who acts in violation of the Constitution ceases to represent the government, unquote. So he wasn't representing the government anyways because he perjured his oath. And that's Brookfield Construction Company versus Stewart, 284 Federal Supplements 94. Quote, ignorance of the law does not excuse misconduct in anyone, least of all a sworn officer of the law, unquote. That's Henry McCowan, 177 C93, and that's 1917. Quote, in the case of illegal arrest, the officer is bound to know these fundamental rights and privileges and must keep within the law at his peril, unquote. That's Theed versus Town of Scandia Valley, 217, Minnesota Reports 218. Quote, failure to obey the command of a police officer constitutes a traditional form of breach of peace. Obviously, however, one cannot be punished for failing to obey the command of an officer if the command itself is violative of the Constitution, unquote. That's Wright versus Georgia, 373 U.S. 284. That's U.S. Supreme Court. The courts have decreed that want of jurisdiction makes all acts of judges, magistrates, U.S. Marshals, sheriffs, local police all void. Not just voidable, void. And that's Nestor versus Hershey, 425, Fed 2nd, page 504. Avoidable judgment is one apparently valid, but in truth wanting in some material respect, and that's City of Lufkin versus McVicker, Texas Civil Appeals, 510 Southwest 2D 141. Quote, where there is no jurisdiction, there is no judge. The proceeding is as nothing. Such has been the law from the days of Malshaya, and that's actually Lord Coke and Coke's commentaries in the 1500s said this, and it's quoted in Bradley versus Fisher at 13 Wall 335, that's U.S. Supreme Court, and that's quoted again in Manning versus Ketchum at 58 F2D 948. Quote, a void judgment is one which from its inception was a complete nullity and without legal effect, unquote. Lubin versus Selective Service Local Board number 27, and that's found at 453 F second Fed 2nd 645, and 14 American Law Reports Fed 298. Quote, a void judgment is one which has no legal force or effect whatever. It is an absolute nullity. Its invalidity may be asserted by any person whose rights are affected at any time and at any place. It need not be attacked directly, but may be attacked collaterally whenever and wherever it is interposed, unquote. That's City of Lufkin versus McVicker, 510 Southwest 2D 141. Quote, avoid judgment insofar as it purports to pronouncement of the court is an absolute nullity, unquote. That's Thompson versus Thompson, 238 Southwest 2D 218. Quote, a void order may be attacked either directly or collaterally at any time, unquote. In re estate of Steinfeld, 630 Northeast 2D. Quote, a void judgment is one which from inception is and forever continues to be absolutely null, without legal efficacy, ineffectual to bind the parties or to support a right, of no legal force and effect whatever, and incapable of enforcement in any matter or to any degree, unquote. That's Lloyd versus Director, Department of Public Safety, 480 South 2D 577, and that's an Alabama court case. Quote, judge loses his absolute immunity from damage actions only when he acts in clear absence of all jurisdiction or performance of an act which is not judicial in nature, unquote. That's Shucker versus Rockwood, 846 F2D 1202. When enforcing mere statutes, judges of all courts do not act judicially and are thus not protected by qualified or limited immunity, but merely act as an extension, as an agent of the involved agency, but only in a ministerial and not in a discretionary capacity. That's Thompson versus Smith. Immunity for judges does not extend to acts which are clearly outside their jurisdiction. That's Bowers versus Heisel. And there's all sorts of citations there. And that's actually U.S. Supreme Court, too. There's some citations there from the U.S. Supreme Court. Anyways, quote, where any state proceeds against any private individual in a judicial form, it is well settled that the state, county, municipality, etc., waives any immunity to counters, cross-claims, complaints by direct or collateral means regarding the matters involved, unquote. That's Lukenbach versus the Thekla, and that's 226 U.S. 328, U.S. Supreme Court. Quote, the government is but an agency to the state, unquote. The state being the sovereign people. That's State versus Chase. That's 175 Minnesota 259. Quote, when acting to enforce a statute and its subsequent amendments to the present date, the judge of a municipal court is acting as an administrative officer and not in a judicial capacity. Courts administrating or enforcing statutes do not act judicially but merely ministerially. Thompson versus Smith, 154 Southeast 583. Quote, ministerial officers are incompetent to retrieve grants of judicial power from the legislature. Their acts in attempting to exercise such power are necessary nullities, unquote. Burns versus Supreme Court, 140 Supreme Court SF. I'm not sure what that is. 140 California 1. Quote, the rights of sovereignty extend to all persons or things not privileged that are within the territory. They extend to all strangers resident therein now, and to those who are naturalized, and to those who are domiciled therein, having taken up their abode with the intention of permanent residence, but also to those whose residence is transitory. All strangers are under the protection of the sovereign while they are within his territory and owe a temporary allegiance in return for that protection, unquote. That's Carlisle versus United States. That's 83 U.S. 147, U.S. Supreme Court, 1873. Quote, they conferred against the government the right to be left alone, the most comprehensive of rights and the right most valued by civilized men, unquote. That's Olmstead versus United States, U.S. Supreme Court, 277, U.S. 438. You know, I just can't tell you how many times I got to say this. Quote, every citizen and freeman is down with certain rights and privileges to enjoy which no written law or statute is required. These are the fundamental or natural rights recognized among all free people, unquote. U.S. versus Morris, 125 federal cases, 322. Quote, in the meantime, the civil law was the form of law imposed in the Roman Empire, which was largely, if not wholly, governed by martial law rule. Equity has always been understood to follow the law. To have superior equity is to turn things on their head. This is exactly what happens when martial law is imposed. If equity is the law, then it follows its own course rather than following the common law, thereby destroying the common law and leaving what is called equity in its place, unquote. And that's taken from non-ratification of the 14th Amendment. And they even in Canada have this codified. In the Alberta Judicature Act, Section 15, it says, quote, in all matters in which there is any conflict or variance between the rules of equity and common law with reference to the same matter, the rules of equity prevail, unquote. And that's exactly, they're talking about that. Okay, in other words, when you have martial law, there's no common law, and equity is supposed to follow common law. We talked about this in the martial law presentation. But and when you have martial law, there's no common law. Equity is normally supposed to follow common law, and when there's no common law there, then equity can do literally anything it wants. And that's why these judges in these courts nowadays say, I can do anything I want in this courtroom, and they're 100% correct, because there's no common law. Matter of fact, if you go in those courtrooms and you start arguing common law, the judge will say it doesn't apply here, and I don't want to hear another word about it, and he'll be correct. Quote, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, unquote. But, quote, but when a long train of abuses and usurpations for pursuing invariably the same object events as the design to reduce them under utter despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government, unquote. And both of those are taken from the Declaration of Independence, 1776. Quote, it is not the function of our government to keep the citizen from falling into error. It is the function of the citizen to keep the government from falling into error, unquote. That's American Communications Association versus Dowds, U.S. Supreme Court, 339 U.S. 382. Quote, no action can be taken against a sovereign in the non-constitutional courts of either the United States or the state courts, and any such action is considered a crime of barratry. Barratry is an offense at common law, unquote. That's State versus Batson, 17 Southeast Reports 2D. At a minimum, you should administrate anybody who potentially could be involved with you or your straw man, including chiefs of police, attorney general, chief judges, presiding judges, prosecutors, commissioners, federal officials, and state officials, people for the Internal Revenue, IRS commissioner, anybody like that. If you're getting anything from government offices, find out who's in charge and administrate them. If it's someone involving, for example, what do they call that agency? That's Child Protective Services. Well, they've got an administrator. Start serving them with documents. If it's somebody from the DMV, they got an administrator. Start serving them with documents. If it's somebody from the city saying you got your grass too long, well, they got an administrator. I guarantee you, call them up and ask them. It's probably the planning department or something like that. Start serving them with documents. And the mayor, he's the guy that's responsible. Start serving him. Even if you have the smallest hint that something's going on involving you or your straw man, administrative, start building a case against them. When the code enforcers, the police, stop you, I cannot be there. You have to be able to articulate your position. Do not show them a government-issued ID unless you absolutely have to, but, quite frankly, don't show it to them. And if they go and search you and find it, then that's an illegal search. So that's the first argument that you bring up in court, is that they obtained this evidence illegally. It's inadmissible as evidence in a court of law. If you have done your homework, then they should decide not to even mess with you. Even if you do produce the government-issued ID, they should decide, if you've done your homework, if you've laid your foundation, then chances are they're not going to want to have anything to do with you. You have to pick your battles. Sometimes it's better to come back and fight another day. Again, you have to pick your battles. I thought somebody texted me in Skype, but I guess not. Anyways, as far as fingerprints are concerned, I tell them that they're not taking my fingerprints. Okay? You have to decide how far you're going to push it. I tell them, you got the guns, so if you want to break my fingers off and take the fingerprints, then I guess you're going to take them, but otherwise, no, you're not. And, again, you have to know how far to push it. Do not consent to their unlawful search, and do not consent to any of their stuff. Always keep your doors locked. Demand, if they get you arrested, demand to see a judge. Now, get his butt out of bed. I don't care if it's 2 o'clock in the morning. And if it doesn't help you, I guarantee it'll help the next guy when you file a criminal complaint against him. because they got to get his butt out of bed, And if they drag get a judge's butt out of bed, and you read the Riot Act, and you're correct, then I guarantee you they're going to get read the Riot Act. I never sign anything. If you sign anything, that's fatal. Never ever sign anything. If they want you to sign something, it's a contract. They all have risk management departments. You can go after their insurance. Find out who their insurance is. I have two groups. They're called Administrating Your Public Servants at Google and Yahoo. I guess we're about timed up here, so I guess we better let it go. I'm not quite finished this, but I guess we'll have to wrap it up next week. Are you ready, Patty?
We can continue on for a few minutes more, Glenn, if you need it.
Okay, well, I'm almost finished this presentation. I'll go ahead and continue then.
Okay.
Anyways, I've got these two groups. They're Administrating Your Public Servants at Google and Yahoo. You can reach me at EngineerWin, ENGINEERWIN, all one word, at gmail.com. If you want access to the files or the posts, you'll need to join the groups. Only members of the groups can read the posts, and only members of the groups can have access to the information. I've also got some documents that I've uploaded to Google, and so there's directories that have files in them. There's also directories that have links. I'm also available to help with document preparation online by email, but I expect people to do their homework. And so part of when you go on the group is there's going to be a file that you have to read, and it gives you instructions on what the basic requirements are to be on the group. And so there's some homework that you have to do. And then once you've done your homework, if you have some concerns or questions, I'm happy to entertain them, but I expect people to come in there with a certain level of understanding first. There are other people on the group who will also be able to help you. I plan on letting people on the group go over what they want with the discussions within some of the limitations. And I'd like to make some people managers on my Yahoo group. You do not have to be in poverty to be a sovereign. There are lots of sovereigns who are very wealthy, but you do have to know the law. There's no such thing as an incompetent sovereign. You have to be competent. You have to know what you're talking about. If you have a lawyer representing you, then you're not sovereign. A driver's license is not a contract, but when you pull it out and give it to them, that's the contract. At common law, the wife and minor children are the property of the husband. At common law, all births are recorded in the family Bible. Do not register the births of your children with the state. Having babies in a hospital is a guaranteed birth registration. Again, that's something that your wife has to be comfortable with. I would never tell my wife that she has to do one thing or another. She's got to be the one to decide that. It's something that's a personal decision for her. But if possible, have babies at home. There's midwives. Two of my kids were given birth at home, and in both cases we had midwives, and the midwives had doctors as backups and hospitals already in place. And they told my wife right up front that if we have any complications, then you go into the hospital, and there's going to be no discussion. It's going to be happening, and we're going to decide it. And that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. If there's a concern, then absolutely. Social security numbers and social insurance numbers are not mandatory. Do not get them. If your straw man has one, don't give it out. Open bank accounts without social security numbers or social insurance numbers. You can, in Canada, you can get Revenue Canada to help you out. Use procedures to get your utilities paid for. There's a guy in Edmonton in Canada that will call up the utilities and get his utilities hooked up, and then when they send the bill, they send it to a zip code, and he'll call them up and tell them, he'll put refuse for fraud on the thing and send it back, and then call them up and tell them, look, I want to pay this bill, but you need to send it to an address without a zip code and my proper name. And every month he'll do that every month, and every month he'll send it to all block capital letters and a postal code, and he'll call them up every month, and 18 months later he's still got the utility service and hasn't paid anything for it, and then what will happen is he'll move and have to get it disconnected, and they'll forgive him the bill. So the bottom line is you got to start thinking outside the box. You know, I can't fight all the battles. We all have to be fighting our own little battles, and as we do that, we beat them back within their proper jurisdiction. When you find something that works, share it with others. There's a set of books about the Perpetual Traveler written by W.G. Hill. They're out of print, but you can buy most of these books on eBay and Amazon.com and in used bookstores from time to time. There's a book, Banking in Silence, How to Keep Your Money, the Passport Report, Perpetual Traveler 2, Practice Freedom and Privacy Tactics books, Think Like a Tycoon. Some of these books are very expensive because they got a lot of good information in them. But the bottom line is you got to start doing research and finding out ways that you can do things. This is a quote by Thomas Jefferson. Quote, "It behooves every man who values liberty of conscience for himself to resist invasions of it in the case of others, or their case may, by change of circumstances, become his own." Unquote. In other words, if you see someone else getting their rights violated, then help them in some way, because ultimately they're going to be knocking at your door too. Do you know who you are? And just never, ever, ever give up. You know, there's a guy that I've helped in Texas. He's an old guy. He's in his 80s. And I can't tell you how many times they just put him in jail. And he just goes down there and he just gets himself comfortable. He's real nice. He's a Southern Baptist preacher. He knows that he doesn't have to do it. But you know, get a driver's license. And so he refuses. He absolutely refuses to get one. And every once in a while they'll come down and put him in jail. And so then what I did is I helped him administrate them. And now they don't do that anymore. Matter of fact, he was telling me one day that the cops stopped him on the road, and the chief of police came over, and the chief of police there, and then the chief of police called all the cops up and told them, "Come over here." And all the cops in this little town, it's just a little town of I don't know, maybe 10,000, I suppose. It's not that little town, but anyways, it's a little town in Texas, and all the cops in that town came there, and the chief of police says, "Take a look at this guy. I want you to see him. I want you to see that he doesn't have license plates on his car. I want you to see him, and I want you to know that you don't be messing with him. You leave him alone." So our administrating worked. And I helped this guy out, and so now he doesn't have to go down and get his vehicle stolen and get put in jail and all this stuff because we administrated him. And so the point is that you have to be persistent. You have to hang in there, and you know, there's my last presentation has this in the last slide, I should say, has that picture that pelican with the frog in his mouth, and the frog is in the mouth, and the frog is reaching around choking the pelican. And the caption says, "Never, ever, ever give up." So anyways, I guess that's about it. I guess we didn't do the summary. We'll have to do that next time. But that's about it for this time. Thank you very much, Patty.
You're welcome, Glenn. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Okay, Glenn, it looks like